Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. So glad you could be joining us today. Folks, what in the world is going on? If you watch the news at all, you can get the sense that America is falling apart. There are so many destructive things happening and so much conflict and strife in our society and culture that it can just be overwhelming at times. I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I would say this: just because something is a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not true, right? The truth is that America is under attack. Our country is under attack by a coalition of people, groups, and nations that hate what we stand for and that view America as the number one enemy or obstacle of their agenda. At its core, this coalition has a Marxist, globalist, and woke agenda with a big dose of anti-Christian and anti-Israel hatred as well. The events going on are really, in my judgment, not disconnected. They're not organic grassroots movements, but they are a result of intentional attack and subversion through propaganda, massive expenditures of money, and infiltration into centers of power and influence. And this process has been going on for many, many years. Let's just look, first of all, at the level of internal division in the United States, the amount of internal strife and division we have today in our country. Riots in the streets, from BLM to Antifa to anti-Israel riots, and now ICE. There seems to be no end to these so apparent uprisings, right? There's abundant evidence, though, that these demonstrations are not spontaneous as they appear or truly grassroots, but rather these people that are participating are paid agitators. They've been trained. Do you remember in the Antifa riots how it was shown that suddenly pallets of bricks showed up on site? How the people were provided with weapons and tools that they used, in their demonstrations. They all have coordinated messaging and things of that nature, proof that they're being bussed in from other locations. Take, for example, the woman who was recently shot by an ICE officer in Minnesota. She wasn't from Minnesota. She was from Colorado, right? And she's out there in the middle of the street obstructing law enforcement in the execution of their duties. And folks, I'm telling you, this is not an accident. Assassinations, attempted assassinations, outrageous behavior going on, doxing people, doxing government officials, the attack on innocent Americans' property like those who own Teslas just because of Elon Musk's support of Donald Trump, death threats, and so forth. Next, I want you to think about the illegal immigration crisis, illegal alien crisis. We literally, under the Joe Biden administration, and really back many years before that, have had virtually open borders in America. Under Biden, 13 million illegals were welcomed into this country, including gang members, cartel leaders, Chinese nationals of military age, terrorists, child sex traffickers, drug dealers, and more. And yet the media tries to convince us, in the face of this onslaught, that allowing these millions of people into our country, now they're not all in that category, of course not, but because we have no law enforcement at the border, there's no way to weed out those who are going to be harmful or control it in any meaningful way. Thousands and thousands of just regular old-fashioned criminals are allowed into our country. And the media tries to convince us that allowing them into the country is really the only morally right thing to do. Because if we don't let them in, well, they're going to starve to death. They're going to not have jobs. And by the way, they've got family here in America and all these other things, the media in a coordinated effort. And the thing you see about all of these things, folks, is you see the media, Western media, speaks with one voice. And it's a pro-leftist, anti-American voice. When Donald Trump tries to deport criminal elements of this illegal invasion, what do we see? Protests, riots, and violence. You know, just a few years ago, the Democrats spoke out against illegal immigration. What has changed and why? Well, let's look next at the COVID pandemic. You remember in COVID, the outbreak in early 2020, the bizarre way that the government and the media worked in lockstep it wasn't just in America, it was all over the world. First, they were lying. They lied about COVID and its origins. Oh, this came out of some cave, a bat virus somewhere in a meat, and then it got to a meat market, you know. Oh, no. Oh, don't say it came out of a lab in Hunan, China. You're anti-Chinese. You're lying. It did come out of a lab. Second, they said it was natural. No, it wasn't. This was an engineered virus. And then they imposed isolation on society, quarantining the general public. In all the past pandemics and epidemics, quarantining was used on the sick, not on those who are healthy. You have the sick go into isolation, not everybody. New phrases entered our vocabulary like social distancing. They taught us that to resist these dictatorial measures, that meant you didn't love your neighbor, right? Closing churches, small businesses, mandating work from home, but allowing big box stores, leftist enterprises like pot shops, and brothels and casinos, abortion mills to stay open, right? Next, they lied to us about the effectiveness of the so-called vaccine, saying, oh, it's effective. It'll stop COVID for sure. Turns out it doesn't. Oh, it's safe. Turns out no. This gives you, potentially fatal problems like blood clots, people dropping dead in front of our very eyes all over the place, and people just saying, oh, pay no attention to that. It's just natural causes, or, it doesn't really matter. Oh, you're anti-vax. Why, you conspiracy theorist, you. Telling us that safe and effective drugs that have been around for decades, like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, were somehow now dangerous and impermissible, prohibiting doctors and other health professionals from providing these things, blocking access to these drugs. This is dictatorship, right? Lying about the number of adverse reactions. The World Economic Forum saying COVID was a great opportunity. Amazing, just amazing. Our government spent nearly $3 trillion on COVID relief, followed up by a COVID stimulus, known as the euphemistically called the American Anti-Inflation Act. How ridiculous. With billions and billions of dollars being wasted, our national debt skyrocketing, and inflation going through the roof. We had censorship by big tech of conservative views all over the place for the last 15 years. Let's talk about election fraud. Right? I know I'm not supposed to use those two words in the same sentence. So let's call it election integrity, right? In the wake of the 2020 elections, when everybody with any common sense could look at what happened on election night and go, something's wrong. You remember that night? Donald Trump is leading. He's about to take the election in the swing states. And all of a sudden, everybody shuts down. Oh, folks, we're going to stop counting now. And we got to get some rest. Boom, 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 boom. Donald Trump's ahead. You wake up the next morning. Oh, guess what? Joe Biden won the election. Wait, what are these semis rolling into the Philadelphia polling stations? And what's this where you see people pulling boxes out from under tables after they kick all the observers out? And all these other stories of irregularities. Oh, this is the great lie. You people, you're an election denier, right? And on we go. And then we have January 6th. Where average, everyday, patriotic, red-blooded Americans show up in Washington, D.C. to say, we're not going to take this. And the media, in a unified narrative, tells us by 2 o'clock that same day, oh, there's no Antifa present. Oh, this is not a red flag operation. Nobody even knows yet, and they're telling us what to believe. It turns out later, yes, the FBI actually had hundreds of agents embedded in the crowd. Why were the police opening the doors of the Capitol and allowing people to enter into the Capitol building? Right? Don't tell me they couldn't keep them out. If you've ever been to the Capitol, you know those doors are this thick. They can lock that thing down tighter than Fort Knox. Then we see the federal government prosecuting these January 6th participants on bizarre new theories of law and imprisoning them even without trial for months and months. How about lawfare against Donald Trump? In a united effort, the Biden administration and leftist state prosecutors all over America begin to attack Donald Trump, right? This actually began with the Russia collusion hoax in 2015, which Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama's knowledge and consent, hatched this plan to accuse Donald Trump of conspiring with Russia to steal the election. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. They end up spending hundreds of millions of dollars and 2 impeachments trying to take him out of power. Why were they so desperate to stop Donald Trump? And then we look at China. In the 1990s, we opened up free trade to China with most favored nation status and then welcoming them into the World Trade Organization. But in 1999, 2 Chinese colonels published a book called Unrestricted Warfare. Unrestricted Warfare details the plan on how to take down America, not just with military might, but building up their military to a point where America could not risk open engagement, while at the same time they invade us with incredible espionage, going into our universities and all institutions in America, where they attack and degrade our entertainment industry and our social media, where they begin to inject poisonous philosophies into our education system and every sector of American society. Meanwhile, with our free trade policy, sending all our factories over to China, China has managed to accumulate an incredible amount of wealth, $30 trillion, with a buildup of a military, including a nuclear arsenal that could destroy our country, space exploration, 400 warships, 3 million men under arms, and a coalition of nations now, because they spent hundreds of billions of dollars in what they call the Silk Road Initiative, or sometimes called the Belts and Road Initiative, building infrastructure, currying favor, bribing public officials, subverting governments all over the world to build an alliance against us, right? And now we've discovered they're actually coming alongside the drug cartels in Venezuela, Colombia, and Mexico to aid in the shipment of destructive drugs into the United States. So guys, at what point do you have to stop and ask the very obvious question, is all of this a coincidence? Is this normal? Or is this somehow related? Is there something going on here? And I'll put the question to you this way, a little bit leading, but yes, are we still in the Cold War? And I think the answer to that, after my interview that's coming up, is going to be quite obvious. My next guest is Kevin Freeman. He's the author of several books, including his book called According to Plan. Kevin Freeman is considered one of the world's leading experts on the issues of economic warfare and financial terrorism. He's consulted for and briefed members of both the U.S. House and Senate, present and past CIA, DIA, FBI, SEC, Homeland Security, and Justice Department members, as well as local and state law enforcement. His research has been presented in official DoD studies on economic warfare, studies on Iran, weapons of mass destruction, and more. The thing about Kevin is that he's a spirit-filled, word-of-faith believer in Jesus Christ. He's traveled extensively on research trips around the world, and he's co-authored many books, including the one I want to feature today called According to Plan. We're also going to talk about his book, Pirate Money. This is an interview that you do not want to miss. I encourage you today, sit tight. We're going to share some information, and after that, we're going to be right back with my good friend Kevin Freeman, who hosts his own show called The Economic War Room. This is going to be super enlightening for you. So I look forward to sharing this interview with you. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
It can be tough being a pastor in a world that seems to have gone mad, where the wolves wear suits and laws try to silence the pulpit. But you're not alone. That's why we created the Pastor's Toolkit, trusted, ready-made resources to help your church engage biblically in public life. Equip your congregation, transform your community, be salt and light. Visit truthandliberty.net.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Truth and Liberty. As I said, our guest today is my good friend Kevin Freeman, and Kevin is the host of Economic War Room on Blaze TV. Kevin, thank you for joining us today on Truth and Liberty.
Oh, Richard, it's always good to be I wish I were there with you in your beautiful studios in Colorado, but it's great to be with you virtually.
Well, it's good to be with you again. You've been here before. You're going to be teaching in our government school in a couple of months. We're looking forward to having you then. But, you know, I like to tackle big subjects and get to the root of things, Kevin. And in today's show, we're talking about what in the world is going on. You've got a book out there that I think answers a lot of these questions, and it's called According to Plan, the Elite's Secret Plan to Sabotage America. Let me ask you this, just to get things started here. Why do you think there's some secret plan to sabotage America?
Well, we see evidence of it every day, don't we? We see, disruptions in our elections, and you wonder, hey, is my vote being counted? We see riots in Minneapolis. We see daycares that aren't actually teaching or helping children, but they're taking federal funds. We see all kinds of evidence of immigration, people coming across open borders. You name it, whether it's in the stock market or whether it is in the border policy or whether we see an evidence of a sabotage plan, whether it's a Cloward Piven strategy that's we're going to overwhelm the welfare rolls. There are a lot of people who want to see America not be the shining city on a hill. The World Economic Forum says, well, America can be one nation among many, but not a superpower. So we're being undermined by adversaries around the world: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and others. They want to see America fall because we stand for individual liberty, and they want to dominate the world. And America's the strong man, to use biblical terms, that stands in their way. You have to first bind the strong man, and then you can plunder the house.
Mm-hmm.
We are the strong man in that sense.
Yeah. So would you agree if you talk like this out in public, people think you're crazy, but there really is a coalition of different factions and nations and individuals and businesses and things like that that are wanting to fundamentally change the world into a global tyranny, preferably of a Marxist philosophy. Am I right on that?
Well, you're right, and somebody might say it's crazy, but here's something that is crazy. Gays and transgenders for Palestine. That's crazy because if you go to the Gaza Strip and you happen to be a homosexual and you are demanding liberty and freedom for the Gazans, and they should have this land, and you hate Israel and so forth, they will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact. They'll throw you off the closest roof because they're going to obey the Quran and do that. So that's what's crazy. Having a unified worldview under a biblical perspective is not crazy. Seeing the facts and the truth of what's happening in the world is not crazy. Recognizing that all of a sudden you're watching the election returns in 2020 and Trump's ahead all this time, then all of a sudden everybody stops counting in 5 swing states at the exact same time, and then they come back from the commercial break and all of a sudden Biden's winning by a wide margin and all these ballots get dumped 100% for Biden. That's the true crazy. So yes, they're trying to gaslight us and telling us that the truth isn't the truth, but we know it is the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that election night, I'll never forget how that, they shut down the counting. And, you and I, we've been following elections for many years, and I have never seen that happen in a presidential election up until that time. You count until the ballots are counted, and you stay up all night doing it because the whole country, in fact, the whole world is waiting on the answer. And all of a sudden, for the first time in history, oh, we're going to go home for a while and come back tomorrow. We don't know. This could take days to finish. And then semis show up with hundreds of thousands of ballots in them. Oh, look what we found. And then you have this spike in the chart, all for Biden, and suddenly he wins. Yeah, too much to believe. Well, Kevin, let me ask you this before we go any further. How can people find your show, Economic War Room? It's on Blaze TV, and anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, economicwarroom.com is our television show. We have a radio program called Pirate Money Radio that airs on American Family Radio. Economic War Room is a Judeo Christian Western civilization show, but Pirate Money Radio is specifically a Christian show. Because I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. He's coming back.
Amen.
He gave his life. He shed his blood for me and for all of humanity. I've accepted him as my Lord and Savior. We've received the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. We operate in power and the authority of God to share the good news of the gospel with everyone around the world. And I'm a patriotic American. So you can follow us at economicwarroom.com or piratemoneyradio.com, or you can get my books like Pirate Money Book at piratemoneybook.com. So I've got lots of websites. I need to fix that and put it all on kevinfreeman.com, which I'll probably do one of these days. But for now, that's how to follow me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, what about this book called According to Plan? The secret, what is it called? The Secret Plan to Sabotage America. How do people find that one?
Yeah, so according to planbook.com, and it is the elite secret plan to sabotage America. And I'm particularly proud of this book, not because of my writing in it, but because of the foreword written
Mm,
by Dr. Ben Carson,
mm,
who's become a dear friend, and he took the time to handwrite it. Now, I've asked some famous people before, would you write a quote for me on my book? And occasionally, more often than it should be true, they'll say, well, you send me a quote, and if I approve it, you can just use that. So I not Dr. Carson.
mhm.
We waited an extra week because his schedule's so busy. We pushed back the printing of the book by an extra week because he said, "No, I want to write it," and he massaged it, and he wrote every single word of that forward. So I'm very proud of having him. Not in an ungodly way, but I'm proud of him and proud of the fact that he would honor me enough to write the forward of that book.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Kevin, let's go back and talk about the World Economic Forum for a second. Now, most people completely unaware of this organization until just the last few years, and even now, most people are unaware of it. But conservatives became aware of it, during the COVID era and stuff like that. But the organizers of it, the whole agenda of it, goes back quite a while. Can you tell us more about what is the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, and I can tell you the origin. I mentioned before we came on the program, I can tie every problem that you want to bring up to the fact that Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And I know that's a bold statement and it's almost an impossible to accept statement until you let me do it. And then you'll see. The World Economic Forum began in the early 1970s when a man named Klaus Schwab, who was the head of the European Management Forum, which was essentially a chamber of commerce for Europe in the 70s. It was a benign organization. And all of a sudden, he said, Nixon took us off the gold standard. Nixon went to China. Nixon went to Saudi Arabia. And Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. And he said, how can I profit from this? I would like to be among the elites that are controlling the world. And so I'm going to bring together the smartest people I can in Davos, Switzerland, and we're going to start talking about how we can capitalize on all of this upheaval happening around the world. And oh, by the way, at the time, people were worried about climate change. They were actually worried about global cooling. They thought the world was going to get too cool, and we
Mhm,
needed to have plans to fix global cooling. It was on the cover of Time,
mhm,
cover of Newsweek. How do we combat global cooling? And they said, let's make it global climate change or global warming. And they began to have conferences. And the idea was that we should have a scientific, technological elite funded by the wealthiest people of the world that would run the entire world and make the world, America would just be one nation among many, and we would control that. By the way, uh, general and then president, Dwight David Eisenhower, in his closing speech, he said, "Beware of the military industrial complex." And people know about that. Some people do. What few people realize is in the same speech, he warned us about the scientific elite.
Mm.
And the scientific elite who tell us, fat's bad for you, so you need to eat only carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Don't eat the protein in animals. All that. That they have been wrong on so many things.
Yes,
The
sir.
scientific elite. They used to tell us that ulcers were caused by too much stomach acid, and then they later figured out that many ulcers are caused by bacteria that's in your stomach that you can take an antibiotic for and cure. Scientific elite think they know everything. They've been wrong about so many things, and climate change is one of those things, but it's a means to an end, and that end is to control the world. And so what do they want today? That was the last part of your question. Well, they put it out. They said by the year 2030, you will own nothing
Yes.
and be happy. You will own nothing. Why did they say that? It is the exact opposite. Satan taking what we had in our fundamental founding principles: life, liberty, property. John Locke had it. We put life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, and the ability to own property and to give and to receive and to build and to do. That's always been tied to human happiness.
Yes.
From the time that God told us to go subdue the earth, he told us, subdue the earth, that you own property. And we've had the ability to own property. They said, we're going to change that. Happiness will be separated from property.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll own nothing and be happy. So, well, how do you do that? Well, you essentially rent from the elite who own everything.
Yeah.
Then they also said, on food, we've got to stop this eating meat. You will eat more bugs in your diet. Meat will be a rare treat. They even said it. It's very public.
Yeah.
They've got a little commercial telling us what's going to happen. They tell us the United States will be one nation of many, not a superpower. They tell us in the same commercial that there'll be open borders because we'll have to move many people across your borders, and there'll be essentially open borders. So all of the Islamic invasion or the Chinese invasion that's happening in America is all a part of the World Economic Forum plot. In fact, in the United Nations, in the year 2000 or 2001, they wrote a paper on how, because we are having low birth rates, that they were going to solve that problem with migration, replacement migration. That's the term. It's not a conspiracy theory, although talking heads like Don Lemon and others may claim it's a conspiracy theory. No. You can go to the UN's own website and download the paper on replacement migration, because the birth rate in America is 1.6 today, which, by the way, is caused by leaving the gold standard. And I can explain that if you want.
Okay.
1.6. And so we have to import people to keep our businesses going.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a combination of elite business, moving people around the world, that they're in charge, one world government. That is the intention of the World Economic Forum.
Kevin, you're a believer. You know the Word of God. Let's get spiritual here for just a minute. Revelation chapter 13 tells us that in the end, there will be a beast who arises out of the sea and ends up controlling the world along with the false prophet. We know this to be the Antichrist. Satan's agenda is to control the world and exterminate the Word of God from the earth. And is this all a manifestation of that spirit that's working in the earth today?
Absolutely. In fact, here's some other revelations. Central bank digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to take a mark of a beast. Mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy or sell without it. The precursor to that is to mandate that everybody in the world uses a single central bank digital currency that we can control you and turn on and off. We've covered that on your program before. Absolutely. And then the Revelation also has the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the pale horse, which is verde. It's a term that means green. And I talk about the green horse of Islam. Well, you read about how they're denying God. And if you don't accept this doctrine given by an angel who appeared to Muhammad, the angel Gabriel supposedly appeared to Muhammad in a cave, and he gave him a doctrine contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It denies that Jesus is the Son of God. It's completely heretical, and that doctrine was given by an angel. What did the Apostle Paul tell us? He told us that even if an angel of light were to appear to you and say a contrary gospel, don't believe him.
Yeah.
Don't go with that. And then it talks in Revelation about all those who are beheaded. Name a religion that denies that Jesus is the Son of God and beheads people. Well, that's Islam. It's all seeing a fulfillment of scriptures in the last days. I can't predict if we're in the end of times or not. I mean, Jesus could tarry for 10 million years if he wanted to, and he can right every problem we had. And if I lived in Nazi Germany in 1942, I would think surely this is the end of days. But so it may be that he tarries, but it sure looks an awful lot like the fulfillment of the end times as written to us by the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos, telling us, warning us of what's to come. And Paul warned us, don't listen to false doctrine coming from an so-called angel of light. And yet that's exactly what Islam is.
Absolutely. And, when COVID came, Kevin, most people, most of the world, they think this is just some kind of pandemic, just some natural occurrence. In fact, but people who sounded the alarm at the very beginning saying, wait, this doesn't seem natural, something's wrong here. Well, they're conspiracy theorists, they're nuts. This came out of a cave somewhere in China. And lo and behold, how is it, brother, that we have the media, not just in this country, but around the world, seems to operate in lockstep with leftist narrative, don't believe your lying eyes types of spins, like, it's not a Chinese virus, you hateful person, and all of that. Can you talk about the media for a second? How is it that it's so deceptive and corrupt today?
All right, there are two reasons. One of them is demonic and the other is money. Demons and money. Those are the two reasons. And like I've said again, I can trace everything back that we see as a problem today to leaving the gold standard. I'm going to do it really quickly. What I'm going to do, though,
Yeah.
is if you may be aware, in 2005, Epoch Times acquired a secret speech given by the defense minister of China, General Chi Haochen. Now, I may have butchered the pronunciation of his name, but he was the Don Rumsfeld at the time of China. And his secret speech basically said, we've got to take over America. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to develop a virus in a lab as a biological weapon, and we're going to unleash it. Now, I don't know if they purposely unleashed it or if it was accidentally released from a Chinese lab, but I just interviewed Frank Gaffney, and he said, what we do know without question is that once that virus was out, that was produced in a Chinese lab, by the way, even the intelligence community of America under Biden agreed that's what happened. DIA, CIA, they all came to the conclusion, it came from the Wuhan lab.
That was not publicly, though, for quite a while. They didn't admit that publicly. They continued to back the lie that it was natural for quite a while. But go ahead. That's all right.
Yeah. So once they released it, the first thing that they did was they weaponized it so that they started flights from Wuhan to around the world. They did everything they could to lock up the personal protection equipment. You look at what they did, and it's killed at least 10 million people. So this is a serious virus. It's a bioweapon. Why didn't the media report on it? That was the basis for your question.
Yes.
Demonic. So the Satan put word out, don't do it, and all the demons that are around it. And money. Don't insult the Chinese, because if you insult the Chinese even the slightest tiny way, for example, if you say that Xi Jinping looks like Winnie the Pooh, and you say it in America and you go back to China, they will arrest you and put you in jail. Seriously. If Top Gun Maverick, Tom Cruise, puts a Taiwan patch on his flight jacket, they say, you know what? You can't air that movie in China, so you just lose all the Chinese box office. If you're Richard Gere and you say you like the Dalai Lama and you're friends with the Dalai Lama, Richard Gere no longer can appear in a movie that appears in China, which means that if you're in Hollywood, it's like, I lost that box office. They're using economic weapons to prevent. If you say something negative, like there is a Chinese practice called Shen Yun, it's a dance troupe that goes around the country, and it's based on It's based on a meditation philosophy. It's not Christian, but it's based on meditation philosophy, Falun Gong in China. Well, if you happen to support that at the New York Times, well, no, we will force you, New York Times, to write negative articles about Shen Yun before it appears anywhere in America. And we can document this, that the Chinese Communist Party won't let anything be said critical of China. Why? Money and demonic influence. Those are the two things they've got.
Well, let's go a little deeper on China, Kevin. Of course, China came under communism, in 1948. It was one of the poorest places on planet Earth for a long time. But in the 1960s, late 60s and then early 70s, Richard Nixon, elected president, began to try to supposedly open up communications with China. Can you trace some of the history of our relationship with China and how, I'm just going to say it, America has been duped, and what are we looking at now? In my monologue, I talked about the meteoric increase in the economy in China, going from $112 billion GDP in 1972 or whatever, up to now we're at over $8 trillion a year. Can you comment, how did this happen, and are we just the biggest suckers in the world?
Yeah, all right. So let's start with China pre-Mao. Pre-Mao, China was a great ally and friend of America. So much so that if you've ever seen the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, then you know the story of Doolittle's Raiders. So Jimmy Doolittle, a colonel in the Army Air Corps, and we just had Pearl Harbor attacked. And so uh, the president, Roosevelt, and the general staff turned and said, we've got to attack Tokyo. Well, it's impossible. We've lost control of our forward air base. The best we've got is Pearl Harbor. There's no way you can take off from Pearl Harbor and land. Well, how are we going to bomb them? We're going to bomb them by we're going to put them on aircraft carriers, these big bombers, never been done before. We're going to fling them off the aircraft carrier and we're going to bomb China. We probably can't do that much damage because we can't get that many off, but we're going to at least strike a moral blow. And then they're going to ditch in the ocean, or they might make it to China if they're really lucky. And they did. 12 of 14 bombers, I think, made it to China and landed in China. And they crash landed in many cases. And you know what the Chinese people did? They grabbed them up. They took them in. They hid them from the Japanese. The Japanese invaded, and they killed 250,000 Chinese personnel to try and get to the dozen or the handful of Americans that had landed there.
Brutal.
They were just brutal in their assault, and the Chinese people didn't care because they loved America. They believed in liberty. They wanted to support us. Those Chinese people are alive today. That spirit in China that loves freedom, that loves Christ, that loves America, that's alive in the heart of China. It is a handful of Chinese at the Communist Party, a tiny number that are ruling the entire country brutally. And during the early period of Mao, they killed 100 million people by famine, by starvation, by brutality, by repression. It is one of the greatest atrocities. But then Nixon goes to China in February 1972. And the reason he had to go to China is we'd left the gold standard in 1971. He goes 6 months after he abandoned the gold standard. He's got to figure out a way to keep prices down. He instituted wage and price controls first, and then that wasn't working. So he goes to China and says, we got to get cheaper consumer goods. Now, Walmart wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today, but let's put it in Walmart terms. Hey, you got to produce everything we can cheaper than anybody else and ship it to us, and we will invest in you. We will take your 12th largest economy in the world and we'll help it grow. We will side with you, and we'll have American investment, American know-how, American ingenuity going into China. We'll manufacture goods that you can sell as cheaper sneakers and cheaper toaster ovens and cheaper microwaves. And they did. And they built it up. And there was a new policy that came under that. Under Deng Xiaoping, Deng had the policy of hide your strength, bide your time. And they decided, well, we're going to pretend like we're becoming freedom-loving, capitalist-loving, American-loving, and we'll loan money to Americans. Nixon's agreement with the Chinese was twofold. We will invest in your economy. You manufacture cheaper goods and send them to us. And then we need one other thing from you. You got to buy our treasury bonds, and you got to buy a lot of them. And they signed a 40-year agreement. I don't think anybody's ever released the fact they signed. Well, everybody knows about the petrodollar, the agreement we signed with the Saudis, which, by the way, is tied into this very same thing. But the agreement with the Chinese was a 40-year agreement from 1973 until 2013. They agreed to buy our bonds with extra money and to price all their goods in US dollars, keeping the dollar as the reserve currency in the world. And in 2013, uh, Xi Jinping came to power, and the first thing he said is that agreement's over. We are now going to de-Americanize the world, and we're going to de-dollarize the world.
Hmm.
No more dollars as the primary reserve currency. Up till that point, China had been solidly behind the dollar, keeping their word that they made with Nixon. But from that point on, they've tried to destroy our dollar.
Yeah.
That's how it all happened. That's where it came from.
Okay, so go ahead then. You've got a book that's going to be coming out telling this whole story. Do you want to mention that? And then take us back to why did Nixon take us off the gold standard, and how did that trigger inflation and all of this tsunami of terrible stuff?
Yeah, all right. So the next book is titled The Four Horsemen of the American Apocalypse and Our Six Trials by Fire. It's actually connecting the dots between According to Plan, which we've been talking about, and my book after that, Pirate Money, which talks about the importance of money and the gold standard. Well, here's what actually happened. In 1971, in August 1971, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard temporarily. It's called closing the gold window. From 1933 to 1971, if you were a foreign government and you had gold, you probably thought it was safer to put it in an American vault because we're separated by oceans. The Germans weren't coming over here and invading. So you put your gold on deposit in New York or Fort Knox, and then we gave you dollars to spend, and we promised the world that those dollars are backed by gold. If you ever want to turn it back in and exchange your paper dollars for gold, we had, by law, 40% of every dollar out there had to be held in the form of gold in a vault. Well, here's what happened is that by 1971, we'd spent a lot of money under the Great Society, under Lyndon Johnson. We started racking up big debts, and nations around the world started to worry. Do you really have enough gold to cover this? And Charles de Gaulle from France, who was the president before and after, he was General de Gaulle during World War II, and he was President de Gaulle afterwards, said, I'm not sure you have enough. We're going to show up in New York. And he sent a destroyer that showed up in New York Harbor. And he said, we're going to load our gold. Here's your paper. We'll give you your paper back. And we're essentially taking our gold out. Now, that is very akin to a run on the bank. If everybody shows up at the bank and says, I want dollars out, there's not enough dollars in the safe of any bank in America to give you back. I'm cashing out. I want everything out. That's not how it works. You just keep enough to operate under, and then they'd have to order it, and it's backed by the FDIC and so forth. Well, here, what's it backed by? Nixon looks and says, gosh, I can give France their gold, but that's going to deplete the amount of gold we have backing the dollar. What if Germany asks for it, or the UK, or Australia? So what he did was he closed the gold window. We are no longer taking dollars for gold and taking dollars back and giving you gold. In other words, he removed the backing of our paper money. And so it becomes unbacked paper money. And he triggered a spiritual truth. Luke 16:11, Jesus said, if you're not faithful with unrighteous mammon, no one will trust you with true riches. Guess what? We were becoming unfaithful because we had an unjust weight and measure. We were no longer producing quarters that had silver in them, and the dollars weren't backed by gold. And we just abandoned any monetary backing, and that allowed the federal government to spend all kinds of money that they don't have, rack up all kinds of debt. And that unleashed all four horsemen. Nixon had a problem on his hands. I can't give you the gold. If I give you all the gold, then nobody's going to buy our bonds. Nobody will want to hold dollars. Everybody will abandon the dollar. That'd be bad for America. Can't do that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to remove the backing, but I got to find people. It's going to cause so much inflation, because if nobody wants dollars, the value of the dollar will plummet, and the cost of goods will go up. So he said immediately he went, and I covered this earlier, he went to China and said, we'll produce this. First thing he did, though, was he instituted wage and price controls. He said, if you're charging 10 cents for a candy bar, Hershey's, 10 cents is all you can charge while wage and price controls are in effect. If you're getting paid $2 an hour for your labor, $2 an hour is all you can get. Nobody's increasing anything. Well, that's a failed, miserable economic policy. It never works, but that's what he said. And then he had to find a long-term solution. That was a Band-Aid with a gusher of a wound. So he went to China to get cheap goods from the Chinese. He went to Saudi Arabia to get cheap oil from the Saudis. They said, well, you'll just produce it and compete against us in America. So he put in the Environmental Protection Agency to stop our drilling for oil and to slow us down. And at the same time, he unleashed the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. So all of that came about because we left the gold standard. So all of the ills that you see, the four horsemen of the American apocalypse, and I'm not saying Revelation horsemen, I'm just borrowing the analogy. Red is communist China, green is Islam and Sharia, blue is globalism, World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and so forth, and the yellow, that's the traitors and cowards in America that have sold us out to the first three threats. And they caused these 6 trials by fire, and I'll run through it very quickly. When you do that, the government has free printing of money and they rack up enormous amounts of debt. That created a debt bomb. We went from a debt measured in billions to debt measured in trillions. And now we have almost $40 trillion in debt, borrowing from our children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. It used to be said, if you have more in debt than you have in gross domestic product, you're toast.
You're bankrupt.
Well, right now our GDP is in the 30 trillion range and our debt's in the 40 trillion range. So we passed that. And by the way, in the next 16 years, we won't even take in enough taxes to pay the interest on the debt, let alone cover our defense or salaries or Social Security or Medicare or any of those things. We're on an undeniable debt spiral. And that is the first trial by fire that we're going to have to address as Americans. That creates a second problem, which is a currency takedown. Foreign nations want to destroy the dollar and remove it as reserve currency of the world. The BRICS nations have conspired to do this. And so that's our second threat, is a currency that they won't even use dollars anywhere in the world. That creates a third threat, which is responding to that. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, and our federal government has a plan to solve that currency takedown by creating a brand new currency. We'll call it central bank digital currency, where it's programmable money and they can control what you buy, when you buy, how you buy it. You won't even own your own money. That's the third trial by fire. The fourth one is all of this is creating the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It's called the wealth gap. Rich people profit from inflation. Poor people are harmed by it. And the middle class struggles just to keep up. That's the reality. So that's why we have these wealthy people. It's not because we don't tax them enough. The reason that we have the top 1/10 of 1% owning everything is because they can invest and protect themselves against inflation, creating this wealth gap. Here's the other problem the wealth gap causes: a demographic problem. At the turn of the prior century, 1900, a woman would get married at age 20, and in 9 months of getting married, she would have her first baby. She's 21 years old with a baby. And she loves it. How many other babies is she going to have in her life? 6. Total of 6 kids per woman in the year 1900. You know what we have now? We have
1.6.
the average age of getting married for women is 29 and a half, and they wait 3.5 years before they have a baby. They want to be married 3.5 years. Why do they delay it? Well, I can't afford a house. We have to have 2 incomes. I can't afford a car. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. So they delay their marriage and they delay having babies because it's not affordable from that wealth gap I just described, because the money keeps losing value. Average age to purchase a first home, somebody recently said, is age 40. That's some research that's out there. I'm not sure if that's exactly true, but people are
It is
getting
going
their
up.
first home
Yeah.
much later. So that's creating a demographic problem, because now we only have 1.6 babies per woman, not 6, which means that we have a shortage of people and laborers. And the World Economic Forum says we should just import them.
Yeah.
And they wrote a paper 25 years ago that says replacement migration. And they said, you know what? We're going to have to bring people from the Middle East, from Africa, and from around the world in China into the United States to replace the fact that we're not having enough babies here, and that has created the immigration problems, which is immigration without assimilation. They're not coming here to be Americans. They're coming here to get their free health care, they get their social benefits and all of that, and they stay in their little enclave. And it used to be, you came here and you were Polish, you're American now. You speak English, you're an American now. And you'd have the grandparents yelling at the kids to learn English. This is our new home. This is where we live, whether German or Polish or Australian or from China or from Singapore, anywhere they came from around the world. But now they want to stay in a little enclave and not be Americans.
Mm-hmm.
They want to bring Sharia to America instead of coming to America and being American. That's our sixth trial by fire, and I call it immigration without assimilation. Those six trials, every single one of them were unleashed by the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen were unleashed by Richard Nixon abandoning the gold standard.
Well, it's a really, really amazing, fascinating analysis, Kevin. I've never heard it, the gold standard linked to these modern day problems. But let me ask you this. You've got another book, it's sitting there in front of you, called Pirate Money. How can Americans shield themselves financially and otherwise? How can we rebuild our independence using gold?
Well, we went back to the Constitution. Article 1, Section 10 is a list of do's and don'ts for states, things a state can do and can't do. A state can't field an army unless it's invaded. A state can't issue a letter of marque and reprisal, which is an old-timey constitutional thing. It's pretty cool. We ought to go look at that at the federal level again, which is essentially hiring private contractors to go enforce government policy and paying them to do it. We sort of kind of do that, but that's how we stop piracy, was letters of marque and reprisal. A state can't have its own currency that's fiat money. They can't print bills and just say, well, this is the Texan, or this is the one from Colorado, or the Floridian. They can't, because they have differing weights and measures. But a state can do one thing. It can make gold and silver coin legal tender. Wait, so a state can have its own money under the Constitution as long as it's gold and silver coin.
Mm.
And it has to be real. It can't be like 2% gold or 2% silver. It's got to be at least the equivalent of what the founders did. You know, the United States didn't have its own money when it started. You know what we did have? We had something known as the currency of the world, a Spanish milled dollar.
Wow.
Milled meaning it was printed on a machine and it's got ridges around it so you can feel like you have on a quarter, so that you wouldn't clip it, take a little silver off of it. But it was 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver. That's a dollar. When George Washington talked about a dollar, that's what he was referencing. A silver dollar was a Spanish mill dollar. Or gold coins, which were called double escudos in Spain, or also known as gold doubloons. Well, that Spanish mill dollar, its name is also a piece of eight.
Mm-hmm.
So when I use the term pieces of eight and gold doubloons, people will say, oh, you mean pirate money? Exactly. That's what the founders intended as the currency of the United States. And they said states could always use that as currency. The federal government, regardless of what they print, regardless of what they do, a state has the authority to do this. Now, the federal government's abandoned the gold standard. We talked about that. They've abandoned silver backing for our money, and they print pieces of paper called Federal Reserve notes that lose value every year due to inflation. So federal government can do what it wants to do, but a state always has a right to use gold doubloons and pieces of eight, or pirate money. Now, a modern version of that is gold and silver bullion, and that's a Supreme Court ruling, Bronson versus Rhodes, that said that's virtually the same thing.
Okay, Kevin, so we've only got 3 minutes left, and I want you to make sure you cover two things for me. Number one, are there any states that have adopted this yet? And how can, other states are considering it? How can people learn more and get involved?
Okay, so I wrote the book Pirate Money in 2023, and I started getting calls from around the country. People read the book and they handed it to their state senator or state representative or their treasurer. In fact, I got a call from Riley Moore, the treasurer of West Virginia. I was getting ready to do a show and the phone rings. I was like, who do I know in West Virginia? So I answered and said, hi, this is Treasurer Riley Moore from West Virginia. Is this Kevin Freeman? I said, yes. He said, well, I have my staff track you down. I thought, wow, that's pretty efficient, pretty cool. I said, what can I do for you, Mr. Treasurer? He says, why in the world do I have 12 copies of your book on my desk? I said, my guess is 12 people think you should read it. And he said, I don't have time to read that. I'm the treasurer. I'm running the state. I can't do that. And he give me the Cliff Notes. And so I told him the Cliff Notes. He said, that's a really cool idea. We should be doing that. Riley Moore is now in the United States Congress. Congressman Riley Moore. Same thing happened in Florida. Jimmy Patronis, who is the treasurer of Florida, he wants to know why people keep sending in the book. The answer is you should do this. He's now congressman in Florida. And we've got treasurer in Louisiana, Dr. John Fleming. He's going to be a senator from Louisiana. What happened was I wrote the book. People read it. They saw instantly how practical and applicable it could be. And so they sent it to their state representative. So I flew back yesterday from Boise, Idaho. I was in the Boise State Capitol, and I was asked to brief 40 senators and representatives and a gubernatorial candidate to fill them in so that this Boise legislature could adopt this. You asked if it's passed anywhere. Well, the first place that passed it was Utah. They passed it, and the governor promptly vetoed it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a bummer. But then they passed it unanimously in Arkansas, and Governor Sarah Sanders signed it, invited me in. I was there with David Barton and Jason Rapert from National Association of Christian Lawmakers. And I will never forget, Governor Sanders looks back at David Barton and says, hey, David, did you put my friends Art Alley and Ken Eldred up to call me to tell me to sign this? And he said, no, I didn't. I said, I did that, Madam Governor. She signed it into law, gave me the signing pen. Governor Ron DeSantis had me speak at the signing ceremony, passed unanimously in Florida. Texas, Governor Greg Abbott signed into law. Governor Jeff Landry in Louisiana. Governor Mike Kehoe in Missouri. So 5 states have passed it, and we're in process of implementing it even now.
Wow, that is amazing. And so if people want to be able to do transactions in gold like that, even though they don't live in those 5 states, can they participate?
Yes, and we're going beyond the 5 states. That was another part of your question. Go to transactionalgold.com, and you can learn where states we've passed it, where we're implementing it, and what other states are considering it. Transactionalgold.com.
Now, Kevin, if I sign up at, say, Missouri's Gold Bullion Depository, and I get my MasterCard, and I've got, let's just take a figure. Let's just say $1,000 on deposit there, although that's just a fraction of an ounce now. Will the value of my deposit increase with the value of gold? So like if gold's going up, will my account increase as well? Or does it earn some arbitrary interest rate?
Nope, it'll go with gold. For example, if you put $1,000 in and you have it held there, you will own 1/5 of an ounce of gold approximately. And no matter what the gold price does, you'll always have 1/5 of an ounce. You just converted your dollars to a different form of money, which is gold or silver.
Now, if gold goes down in value, will my account balance go down in dollars? Like, will the value of it in dollars go down?
The purchasing power of gold goes down in price. The purchasing power will go down with gold. But think about it. Gold was $20 an ounce 100 years ago. It does go up and down on a day-to-day basis, but over the long term, it's historically only gone up.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So how do people learn more about this? I think you mentioned the website. Can you tell us again?
Transactionalgold.com, and that is our effort in the states to get states to adopt gold and silver as money as the Constitution and really the Bible requires.
And if they want to get a copy of Pirate Money, it's piratemoney.com?
Piratemoneybook.com.
Piratemoneybook.com. Well, Kevin, unfortunately, I'm out of time today. But wow, what a tour de force of information. Thank you so much for coming on Truth and Liberty. Thank you all to all of our viewers for watching today. I highly encourage you to get educated on this subject. Get every one of Kevin's books and let's become advocates for what he's trying to accomplish here. And we'll see everybody again next time here on Truth and Liberty.